One of the visuals from Trump's attempt to overthrow the government on January 6, 2021, that really stuck with me. It really irritated the hell out of me for a number of reasons. But I'll preface my complaint by saying that, I've lived in the South now for probably, oh my goodness, the better part of 55 years. And I have come to understand the white Southern attitude about a number of things, especially the white Southern Christian evangelical attitude about a number of things. And it's pretty fucked up. I mean, it just is. But I have come to understand that this is what white Southerners really believe. They believe in the lost cause, which was their defense of people owning people and beating the hell out of them and making them work for nothing until they dropped dead. In other words, they believed in slavery. I also have absorbed as much as a white person can, in my opinion, in just living among white folk and black folk, a bit of black consciousness also about how black folk perceive the rotten crap that was dumped on them, their ancestors, starting in the year 1619 and working its way all the way up through enslavement, Jim Crow, and finally to the modern day. So taking all that into consideration, the reason I bring that up is because the cross of Saint who? I forget, Saint Stephen? I forget who it is. The Confederate battle flag, the stars and bars. Seeing that flag, after having lived in the South for over half a century, seeing that flag and understanding what it represents, every time I see it, it's almost, no, not quite, but almost has an effect on me as seeing the swastika on a flag. I understand what the stars and bars represents to white Christian Southerners. And for the most part, it means something evil and rotten and shitty that they feel was perpetrated against them, not against the black folk, under which that symbol forced enslavement, brutality, death, destruction, families being ripped apart. So when the picture of the guy marching through the U.S. Capitol carrying that fucking filthy banner, and the guy's name was Kevin Seefried. When I saw that picture originally, when I saw the video and then the photo that made the rounds through social media, it was just disgusting to me. The guy carrying the Confederate flag looks like a half-witted white person anyway, like he just learned to fucking walk upright that morning before he joined in the attempt to overthrow the government. And it has been pointed out, even during the horror, the murder of 800,000 Americans by other Americans during the Civil War, even during that time, the symbol of slavery, the symbol of idiocy, a symbol of denying people the right to goddamn exist as a human being. In other words, the Confederate flag never made its way into the U.S. Capitol until January 6, 2021, at the instigation of this filthy bastard Donald Trump. So Kevin Seefried, there he was with a shit-eating grin on his face. He looked like something, like I said, just learned to walk upright that morning, just a total idiot. There he is, waving his Confederate battle flag. What the fuck was he trying to say by doing that? I mean, was it just an act of general defiance? I would imagine, though, Kevin Seefried probably has lived his whole life in general defiance. Probably brought on by the fact that I would assume he's an ignorant son of a bitch. He certainly is ignorant where it concerns U.S. history, or more specifically, the history of the Confederacy during the Civil War. But anyway, using the fact that the Supreme Court is taking up a case that is central to the January 6th felony obstruction charges. Now it's a Trump Supreme Court, the idiots that are on the Supreme Court that say, yeah, we'll hear that case. Another Trump judge, one Trevor McFadden, has ordered the release of the Confederate flag-carrying halfwit, Kevin Seefried, ordered his release. And Kevin's attorneys claimed that his appeal, Kevin's appeal, quote, raises a substantial question that is likely to result in a reversal, a new trial, a non-custodial sentence, or a custodial sentence that will have ended by the time the appeal is decided. Which is a bunch of, to me, more of the parsing, the gibberish of courtroom arguments. Not arguments about the law, but just courtroom arguments that attorneys who are obviously defending a criminal son of a bitch has to result to. But there are a few things that irritate me more than seeing a judge put on the bench by Trump and his accomplice, the filthy Mitch McConnell, using the Trump members of the Supreme Court to help avoid accountability for the coup that was attempted against the United States, led by the orange bastard. So we're talking about the traitor, the MAGA believer, the Trump suck fool, Kevin Seefried, the idiot that carried the flag. He is being looked after now by the Trump legal team, such as it is. These dirty, rotten anti-Americans. He's being looked after, and now he's been ordered released by a Trump-appointed judge, Trevor McFadden. Now, according to Newsweek, quote, Kevin Seefried was sentenced to 3 years in prison for a felony conviction of obstruction of an official proceeding, as well as 12 months and 6 months for misdemeanor charges. The Department of Justice said that Seefried, as well as his son Hunter, were among the first to enter the Capitol and were photographed carrying a Confederate flag while inside. End quote. Now, that obstruction charge is at the center of a case picked up by the Supreme Court, according to Newsweek and other sources. The name of that case is Fisher versus the United States. And the Department of Justice in that case charges, quote, an obstruction of an official proceeding, end quote. That is what is being challenged at the Supreme Court, that the official declaration of the votes that were that came as a result of the various states, the votes from the so-called Electoral College, that the reading of those votes by the Vice President of the United States, what the Trump attorneys are trying to say is, well, that's not an official proceeding. So therefore, everything should be dismissed. And the Supreme Court said, well, okay, we'll take up the case in order to, quote, determine whether the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit erred in construing that the federal law which prohibits obstruction of congressional inquiries and investigations actually applies in the case. I mean, why aren't you and I on the bench? No, you listening right now. Why aren't you on the bench or I on the bench? I mean, what would you say? What would I say in a case? I would probably say, and this is why I wouldn't be on the bench very long, I would probably say to a legal team that brought this kind of an appeal to me to let this, in this case, this particular little fucker, Kevin Seefried, out of jail, I'd probably say something to the effect of, get the fuck out of my courtroom. All of you. Deputies, remove these assholes. Get them out of here. But I am not a judge, and neither are you. But Judge McFadden, a Trump appointee, assisted by Mitch McConnell, said, let this little prick out. Let him out. Now, the article in Newsweek continues thus, quote, according to court documents, the Judge McFadden determined that Seefried, the flag-carrying asshole, does not pose a flight risk or a danger to his community, and that his appeal was not, quote, for the purpose of delay, and it does raise a substantial question, that's end quote, that is likely to result in a reversal, a new trial, yada, 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 yada. Well, the judge in this case, McFadden, the Trump appointee, went even further, admitting that it was based on the partisan interest of the Supreme Court. He noted, the judge noticed, I mean, the judge noted that at least 4 Supreme Court justices are interested in taking up the challenge to the obstruction charge leveled by the Department of Justice against this asshole, and that if the court rules in favor, in this case of Fisher versus United States, which that case says, well, it's not really an official proceeding, the confirmation of the Electoral College. It's not an official proceeding. It's a traditional proceeding. It has nothing in the Supreme, nothing in the law so far that says it is an official proceeding. I mean, this is giving me a headache, isn't it? You? I mean, all this shit just swirls around, and it's just the attempts by. Now I understand the line in Shakespeare: "First thing we do is kill all the lawyers." Is that from Shakespeare? I think it is. Of course, it meant something entirely different, but that phrase keeps popping into my head, especially these so-called lawyers. So McFadden, the judge who ordered this creep's release, noted that at least 4 Supreme Court justices are interested in taking up the challenge. And you can probably guess who the 4 are. I mean, I don't think it would be very difficult. And it takes 4 Supreme Court justices to agree to take a case before the Supreme Court can take it. And the judge, McFadden, in ruling in the creep's favor, said that if the court rules that it was not an official proceeding, quote, it will almost certainly mean that Seefried's analogous conduct did not violate the obstruction law. In that case, the judge went on, Seefried will be left serving only his sentences for the 4 misdemeanor convictions, but by the time his appeal has concluded, those custodial sentences will have likely concluded. Do you understand what's being said here? This judge, this Trump-appointed, McFadden, damn it, not McFadden. It is Judge McFadden. But the Trump-appointed judge is agreeing that several of the Trump-appointed Supreme Court judges are very likely, I don't know how this guy comes to, maybe he's a mind reader, but very likely will rule that the determination of the Electoral College in the Senate chambers is not necessarily or is not factually an official proceeding. So therefore, being charged with obstruction in an official proceeding no longer holds, and the whole thing has to be dismissed. Now, that's one of the cases in front of the Supreme Court. In other words, the Supreme Court, in a ruling in that case, Fisher versus whatever the hell it is, could upend every single thing that the Justice Department has done, that Jack Smith has done to bring these savages to justice. And everything keeps hanging on these threads. Whereas you, if you were a judge, or I, God knows if I were a judge, this shit would have been decided a long time ago. If I were Attorney General, I mean, I would have brought charges against these bastards on January 7th, 2021. I would have waited 2 years. I wouldn't have waited until after the hearing in Congress, the J6 committee, who spent weeks, months gathering evidence and information and testimony and depositions, and then presented everything, and then Finally, the Justice Department said, well, there may be a there. We better appoint a special prosecutor. Oh, Jesus Christ. The judge also, this McFadden freak, Trevor McFadden, the Trump judge, he also wrote that his sentence for misdemeanor charges, Seefried sentences for misdemeanor charges, would be over by May the 31st, and that the flag-carrying prick, therefore, should be released on or about that date, ruling that, quote, 1 year sentence is likely adequate, end quote. So release him now. Well, this is not May 31st. This is March 28th. So the Trump judge, Trevor McFadden, seems to have the best interests at heart of these bastards who tried to overthrow the U.S. government. And he really does show concern and is acting in favor of these traitorous bastards. Now, according to what I have here, U.S. Attorney Matthew Graves wrote in a court filing last week that if the Supreme Court sides with Fisher, the one who's saying there was no official proceeding when the Electoral College votes were being counted, it was a traditional proceeding or something. If the Supreme Court rules in favor, then the government could request consecutive rather than concurrent sentences for defendants on the misdemeanor charges, which in some cases may not necessarily result in shorter prison sentences. But it's going to throw the whole thing into confusion again when this should be fairly simple. These bastards tried to overthrow the government. I mean, there's no question about it. We all saw it. We sat there and watched. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. You know, the Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.